scripture. This is Colossians 3:23. Whatever you do, work at it with your heart, as working for the Lord, not for men, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. Is the Lord Christ your servant? That verse has a lot of application. I think it has tremendous application with the subject we're getting ready to talk about. And before we get into the whole subject of personal development, I want to tell you a little quick story about me. And I think this will resonate with a lot of y'all. When I was a young boy, about 14, I wanted to earn some money. So I went to my parents and said, how can I earn some money? I said, well, you can't go to work for a restaurant or someplace because the laws won't prohibit that. So let's see if we can get you a job selling drinks on a golf course. So I went to a golf course owner, and he said, sure, if you want to do this, you do it on your own, it's totally yours, and then you can, whatever you make is yours. So I go out and I buy lemonade, I buy Fanta, I buy drinks, I set up on the golf course. So I'm making money, and one day a golfer comes walking by, and he says, young man, you're an entrepreneur. Now go home and look up that word and tell me what, I'm going to be back here tomorrow, tell me what that word means. So I go home, we didn't have the internet then, so I had to look at a book, look it up, and I look, it says, oh, it's someone who assumes the risk of starting a business. So I go back, and he comes back the next day playing golf. He says, what does the word mean? And I told him. He said, well, someday you're going to be an entrepreneur. So I said, great, sounds good. So 20 years later, I said, I've got an idea. Now, I remember that man back many years ago who spoke into my life and said, you're going to be an entrepreneur. That sounds pretty risky, but I think I'm going to do it. So I had this idea for a business. So first thing I have to do is go to a bank. So I'll take my business plan, which all y'all have business plans that you've done, and your clients have business plans. I go to the bank, not Mr. Banker, I have this great idea. I want to start this business. No, you don't have a good enough business plan. Boom. So go down the street, next bank, bank, knock. Mr. Banker, here's my business plan. Oh, you don't have enough collateral, you don't have enough this, you don't have enough that. Slam to the, not literally, but I keep going, and I finally go to a bank where there's a combination of Florence and Pierre and Patrick and Pastor Glenda sitting there behind the desk. And he said, young man, I believe in you. He said, I like your idea. No, you don't have a lot of collateral. No, you don't have a lot of people behind you, but I like your idea. I believe in you. So let's do this. So he gives me a loan, and then 20 years later, here we are. I have a business. What he had mentioned, Ridge Rock retaining walls, we're in construction materials. Now I have a lot of people working for me. And now it's not just me. And the same thing, my story, I think, resonates with each of y'all on some level. Either you're all part of small organizations that started from a vision that somebody had, or you're working with clients who are just starting out with a vision. But at some point, as we just talked about earlier in the previous presentation, like we said, at some point it's not about you anymore. It's about casting the vision to someone else. And letting go and getting out of the way. And that's what personal development is. And I think that's God's plan for us too, is that He has a plan for us to do our best or use our talents for Him and then impart that to others. So this morning, we're going to go through some exercise that's going to talk about that. I'm going to introduce my colleague, Mr. Wilson here, Dick Wilson, who works for the Federal Reserve. And which is a pretty big deal in the U.S. And he's done a lot of personal development through the years, and he's been in the banking industry. So I'm going to turn it over to you. He's going to lead us through this.
Now, the first thing I have to do is disappoint you, because this is not really about personal development. The word up here is adopting professional development, and we'll get into talk about what's the difference there. But in order to understand me, because everybody tells me I am a little bit odd in the way I think, let me tell you some where I'm coming from. I grew up on a farm, but my dad was a professor of biochemistry. And my mom ran a very complicated super microscope for research. So I'm the least educated person in my family, although I have lots of degrees. But in college, I studied linguistics. And one of my favorite courses was African languages. So in studying that, I read a number of traditional African stories, and my favorite one was in Evident, the squirrel and the spider, which we can talk about later. But that's where I got started, my interest in Africa and African languages. However, I went on to spend 6 years in protein chemistry research, at which point I then moved to plan to go to East Asia as a missionary and got a Master of Divinity. Unfortunately, around that time my wife died, my first wife. That plan did not work out, and I switched careers to computer science. So for the last 20 or 30 years I've been in computer science, and I've worked with Bank of America and the Federal Reserve System. And the most interesting aspect of that is, for the last 7 years at Bank of America, I acted as a consultant from our bank to China Construction Bank, which is the second largest company and the second largest bank of the world. It was a fascinating experience as a professional, but as Jim said, it shows that I've had to do a lot of different views on professional development. And the other thing is that sometimes professional development means changing professions. So you have to think radically sometimes in thinking about how to develop your career and your profession. So with that, let's get started, see how this works. So here's what we're going to talk about, and it's been very significant that much of our message up to this point is recognizing that the gospel really came to change us, not to congratulate us. Like, Jesus didn't come and explain that the gospel of the kingdom is, you're so great, do whatever you want. You don't have to change at all. No, the gospel is about seeking the goal of Christ's resurrection and the life and sort of empowerment that comes from being one with Him. So, what do we want to accomplish today? We want to, in this part of our discussion, introduce some concepts to try to equip you with ideas about how to incorporate professional development personally for yourself, but also for your organization. So we're going to be talking at different levels to board members, to directors, and to staff. And after some of that, in fact, I'm going to start my timer because I'm an obsessed Westerner. And then we're going to talk about breaking up into 3 groups to have board members, directors, and staff members get together and talk about the different aspects and decisions that you have to make with respect to professional development for yourselves and your organization. So we'll divide into 3 groups for hopefully 20 minutes or so, right? And then our final part is really to take part over lunch as we get back together to talk about, what did we think about? What did we talk about together across those roles as we sit at the table together? Professional development is what shows me how I find my place in the system and fit in. So if I want to succeed professionally in China, what do I need to do? Join the Communist Party, step number 1. And then I have to go to party school. Now, that's not what you think it is. Party school is pretty grueling training to become a card-carrying, supportive, knowledgeable member of the Communist Party. So most of my close friends who were leaders that I worked with, they were Communist Party members. You had to be in order to be an effective leader and professional. This is a picture of one of the party schools that we went to, and I did some training there. for the bank, not for the party. So you're thinking, well, is that what I want to do for professional development? Well, no, you can be like an American. What is professional development in America? And I'm going to be really frank here, because I have seen the good side and really the not so good side of that in my own culture. So in the USA, professional development comes down in a lot of ways just to how do I personally get ahead and succeed? So I have all these options to go to training and get, usually there's some secret method that someone wants to fill me in on how to be successful. I can make you thin. That will be good for you. I can make you rich. That will be good for you. I can help overcome your problems. I can give you a new code for living life, and you'll get what you want. So this is kind of the American model. Now, we have about 25 minutes left to talk. Which one of these do you want to talk about? Do you want to learn how to fit in with the system? Or do you want to learn how to be an independent, successful person all by yourself? Okay, who wants to join the Communist Party? Okay, no. Okay, well, who wants to just be a totally independent, successful person and career person? I'm sensing that we're headed in the right direction here, which is maybe neither one of those is what we really want here. So our real question is, what is professional development in Africa? That's a big question mark. Because if you try to just pick up what you see in China or the United States or some other place, it will give you a little slice of what the answer really is. But it won't really tell you what you need to do. So part of us is answering that question, what should this look like in Africa? In which case, I'm not the one to be standing up here. But the even bigger question is this: what does professional development look like in the kingdom of God? And I think this is where we can all come together in our faith and recognize what Paul says and what we talked about earlier in many of our sessions. Paul says, I don't consider myself yet to have taken hold of my goal, but one thing I do, forgetting what's behind and straining toward what's ahead, I press on towards the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ. All of us then who are mature should take such a view of things. So we are looking here to develop a mature view of how I press forward to follow the Lord in the environment of my work and my organization. So most of the time we look at this passage and think, well, Paul is telling us how to be personally devoted. Like we should read the Bible or we should pray more. But it goes way beyond that. The question we have to ask ourselves is, why should I be doing this professional development? And how do I follow Paul's advice in microfinance? As we focus on growing, which is really what professional development is all about, we are attracting people who want to grow to our board of directors, our directors and staff, and even among our clients. So without focusing on this function of developing and growing across the organization, we're going to just be an organization that sits there and really can't cope with the changing world around us. Not only that, but it actually makes everybody in the organization more valuable. You'll find that this actually turns into a problem because you bring people in, they become equipped with new skills, new insights, new maturity, and then they're like, wait a second, I got an idea. I think I'll go to work somewhere else. So it's a challenge, but it's also exactly what you want to do. But the other thing is it attracts clients to you because they recognize, like Jim said, here's someone who sees the potential in me and can actually offer me help in thinking how to achieve my goals as a client. And as Evans brought up yesterday, the fact that we don't have skills in our organization can lead to higher expenses. You don't have the skills to do something in your organization, you have to make that question, especially as a director or the board. Am I going to look for this outside? That can be really expensive. Or just say, well, we can't do that. We don't know how to do that. We're not going to do that. Or who in my organization is best to develop this capability? Maybe it's even something like motorcycle maintenance, which you think is not really part of your main mission. So these are some of the things that drive us towards looking in microfinance for developing our professional growth. Now, I'm going to talk about this, and this really comes down to a pretty simple process. But there's a lot of fancy human resources lingo that is used in sort of Western thinking and systems. And I've sat through like a couple of decades of it at Bank of America and other companies. The first question is asking yourself individually and as an organization, well, where do we need to be? What am I trying to achieve in my own direction, and how do I envision the future? That's one of the things we're talking about here. And so this conference should be a real strong input into your thinking about professional development. Now, the official term for that is, if you're looking for the definition of what does a director do? What does a loan officer do? You want to have a defined, desired profile for that person, for that role, and put it down in a document. Now, I know writing stuff down is not fun, but I've gone to the dark side myself. I started off not writing stuff down, but I kept having people come to me and ask, how in the world did you do what you just did? And I found that in order to pass on what I learned, and in order to help other people make consistent decisions, I actually benefited myself a lot from writing it down once and then giving it to them. So that's how you develop consistency in your organization. The level of formality that you choose to do that with depends on where you are, how big you are, how fast you're changing, and how much sort of bureaucracy and formality about all of these processes depends really on the board of directors and the directors themselves. So your next step is, well, here's where I want to be. What's missing? You know, what am I missing in order to get there? That's a gap analysis. You have to sit down and say, well, I don't really know how to fix motorcycles. I know how to ride one. That's good. Where would I go to get motorcycle maintenance training? Is there a school I have to go to? This is where we get into the third step. What's my plan to get there? What are the resources I have? That's the sort of official personal development plan. Now, you may think, well, I've got a friend who knows how to fix motorcycles. There's a school. Oops, I have to pay for the school. How am I going to pay for the school? I can read a manual. Maybe there's something on the internet. Maybe I can just take my own motorbike apart and try to put it back together. There are lots of different options here and combinations. Some may be more successful than others. But you have to think about that in your own context. So this is your personal development plan. And I will confess that even without someone coming in and telling me this, I have developed every year a plan of what is it that I need to do this year to do better what I'm doing now and what I need to do in the next step of my maturity as a person and as a worker. So my wife likes to tell this story of how ridiculously nerdy I am. Because when I was working in the laboratory for research, I would take all my lunch hours and extra time, and I would go read a biochemistry textbook. And I memorized all of the molecular structures of all the amino acids and their electronegativity characteristics and blah, blah, blah. And it was like, oh, really? Did I marry that person? But hey, that's what I like to do, and that's what I needed to do. Any questions so far? I think this should be sensible. Soon we're going to get into the tougher stuff. Okay, so we talked about how to make such a plan, and in order to develop, get beyond just saying, oh, I wish I could do something. There's something I need to do. You have to think about what are the means that I could use in order to take a step in the right direction. And here, you need to broaden your thinking, not just think in conventional methods like, can I go to school or buy a certificate or something like that. You have to think through, what's available. You can think of, I'm going to go read some books. I'm going to go look online. I'm going to go to school. A lot of times, though, there are people who are trying to get the same place you are, and you want to find those people and a community of practice. You may have to be the person who brings those folks together. I've done that before, and show leadership. Maybe you need to get practice in doing something. Like, for example, in the United States, there are records in the medical industry of how many operations of a certain kind has a person done. So, as a brain surgeon, one might want to say, on the patient side, I don't think I want to be the second operation that this person does. As the doctor, you're thinking, I need to get more practice. So you can see how these things are complementary. And then, usually programs are built into it. How do you get practice? How do you get experience? What kind of internship is out there? You may need to find somebody who can coach you by giving you advice. The advice of someone who's on the same road that you are, but further down the same road. Or mentoring, which is more involved in relational depth and a much more broad connection to somebody that you're trying to learn from. Or for mentors, you're trying to help a person mature, not just in like one narrow skill, but how do I incorporate that skill and your experience into a path for your professional life? Okay, let's go back. The question then is, well, I have all these options of learning, but, well, what should I be learning? There are many different things that you can focus on, and the best thing to do is to balance your thinking, not just in terms of technical competence. You have to think in terms of what are the skills I need in order to do the things that I'm being asked to do at work. It may be not just like, how do I fill out a form, but how do I calculate par? Why does that matter? How do I make decisions about risk on credit or liquidity? So like Pierre was talking about liquidity problems. This is a very major issue in the last 5 years in international banking regulation because banking groups finally realized that the reason banks fail is mostly not because they don't have enough capital, it's because they run out of money to pay their bills. Oops. And then Lehman Brothers, one of the largest banks in the United States, just dies one day because they ran out of money. So it may be, though, that you need skill in relationships. I have to tell this story. When I was like 18 or 20, I was extremely introverted, and I actually am very introverted now. I'm like, I want to go sit in my room. But I cover that up pretty well. Yeah, I'm more sociable now. But I remember being in a place one time, and somebody said hi to me, and I said, oh, hi. And what I was thinking inside was, don't ask me anything else. I already acknowledged your presence, so please don't involve me. And eventually I kind of got to the point, it's like, well, if I'm really supposed to love people, maybe I should talk to them a little bit more and get involved in their lives. And, that's been, 45 years ago. And maybe I'm making some progress in that. So it's not just about technical things. There's not a really good way to change who you are because God made you who you are. But what you can do is mature the different parts of yourself in a way that gives you better integration over who you are, and that I can be the best introvert that I can be and have an impact on the lives of the people that I come in contact with. And I'm never going to like going to parties or dancing around the room. But I can have the most fun I can while I'm doing that. So as you're thinking about your plan, don't think about, I have to change and become a different person. I have to become the person God wants me to be with the skills that I need based on who I am for this situation. Okay, we already did that. Now we have different folks in our room here. You need to think about your role in this concern over professional development in slightly different ways. If you're thinking about yourself as a board member, you have to think about it in terms of, for my organization, what are the strategic needs that need to come together and balance each other for the development and growth of the organization. So you need to focus on the development of the directors and the establishment of the culture that allows growth in your organization. If you're a director and you're in the management of the company, you need to focus on what is the right way for me to develop the capabilities of the loan officers, the accountants, the cashiers who are in my organization. What is it that they need for their role? Like cashiers probably should have a good ability to handle basic accounting and focus on detail and the ability to follow processes step by step. So you need to focus on how do I develop that in my people. And because you are the folks who are going to implement the strategies of the organization, you need to know enough about new areas of direction for the group so that you can be able to either bring in experts, or if you brought in experts, to know that they're just telling you a fake story, or lead the organization towards taking new steps on your own initiative. And as a personal staff member, and this really applies to all of us, whatever level we're at, of asking ourselves, well, what's the next step for me? How does my role as a board of directors, what am I missing there? Do I have a broad enough perspective? Do I really understand the market? Do I just need to understand my province, or my town, or my country? Do I need to understand, like what we've been hearing from Evans? What's the direction of microfinance across the world? What's the direction of microfinance across Africa? So you need to think in broad terms, and at the same time, any role that you're in, you're asking, am I equipped for that? Professional development means asking about, how do I get better equipped to do that job? Now, I'm gonna verge off here a little bit, because there are some real barriers to being able to do that. And the biggest barrier is this: ignorance. And the problem is not just being ignorant. The problem is that if you're talking about developing a new capability or capacity, you're ignorant of even what you don't know. And you're also ignorant that you don't know it. So you're like in a complete double whammy of trying to say, well, how should I improve? And you're like, what? I don't need to improve. What's the deal? So this is some interesting research. We have a professor who gives tests to a lot of students. And this is the score, this is like a score of a test. And, the people who performed well, they got a 10 on the test. The people who did well got a 90 on the test. And this is the distribution of actual performance on a test. Well, what this professor noticed was he kept getting people come in and say, these are what we call the whiners. But I really thought I knew all this material and you gave me such a bad grade. Now I can't pass and I'm not going to graduate. And so he's like, clearly, I've known the entire semester that these people had no idea what was going on in my class. Why are they coming in and asking me this? How could they make that question? So, he's like, hey, I'm a sociologist. Let's study this. So he did many controlled tests of people. And let me ask you, for the people down here who were at the bottom of capability and knowledge, where do you think they rated themselves in terms of their, let's see if I can get this up, their perceived ability and their perceived score? Okay, so I'm going to start here, and you kind of start raising your hand if you think, did they think they did twice as good as what they actually did? Somebody's got to raise their hand. How good did these people think they were? Okay, I'm keeping it going up. Probably 60. So the actual answer to this question is where the worst, least knowledgeable people were in terms of their understanding of what they knew. Right there. 6 or 7 times higher. And in fact, all the people who were failing completely were thinking, hey, I'm definitely better than average. I don't even know why I'm in this class. Because I know it already. I know more than all my generals. So this is like the first point. Now, what do you suppose about the people who actually were over here, who were like, they totally aced the test? What do they think about their ability and their score?
They thought they were low.
They actually thought, did I pass that? I'm sure I didn't do as well as the other people in the class. And so if you look at the overall distribution here, you see that in order to actually have a realistic view of what you know, you actually have to be better than average to come into terms with reality. You have to start listening to not just your own group of people, because often, let me tell you, this is a delusion that affects groups, not just individual people. So you need to start learning and listening to people who are outside your normal boundaries, people from a different country, from a different culture, from a different experience, and listen to them and start noticing things that you didn't notice before. And that's part of why we're here, is to share our different experiences, our different perspectives, so that someone here knows that in a few years, they're going to have to worry about liquidity management. What does that mean? How can I possibly find tools and skills to start dealing with that? Where do I get training? How do I deal with regulatory issues and concerns? Does that really affect the way donors think about me? And you start asking all these questions. So instead of not asking questions because you already know stuff, you're down here saying, I think I know some stuff, but do I really know what I think I know? Okay. I hope that's a good challenge. We see that in the Bible, frankly, a lot. These are the people who, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus ends up saying, There are many in that last day who will come to me and say, Lord, Lord, did we not do great things in your name? And I'll say, depart from me, because I never knew you. So we want to be on the right-hand side of that equation instead of the left-hand side. We see that in the Bible a lot. Proverbs is full of it. So some of the other barriers, complacency, like, hey, everything's working fine. Don't fix a problem that doesn't exist. I think it's going to work. What we're doing is fine. Don't make anybody feel bad. I'm not better than my fathers or my elders, am I? Why would I suggest that we should do something different? Tomorrow will take care of itself. And we vacillate between these three convictions, and all of them stop us in our tracks because we're afraid to take another step. Maybe somebody is not going to like the outcome. Maybe it really will fail. What then? And a lot of that leads to this conviction here that it's better just not to do anything. Because whatever I do, it's not going to make any difference. And this is something that is really a challenge for all of us because these are the systemic problems. Corruption. Is there something I can do about corruption? I don't know what it is. I believe, for example, that the government maybe should provide funds for and regulation for microfinance. But then all of a sudden I think, well, if that happens, then they'll be in control and will introduce corrupt influences and practices into the kinds of service that we really hold dear. How is that going to work? We cannot just give up, but we have to live with a lot of tension if we're going to plan to move forward professionally. And it takes pulling together a lot of people with a lot of perspectives, sharing and moving forward as we try to learn. Okay, so now we're going to break up into three different groups. We are going to ask board members to think about certain questions and talk to each other, directors to think about certain questions, and staff members to think about certain questions. And you can frankly come up with some other questions too, that would be great. So like for the board, a really important question is, what is your leadership model? Now, I will just tell you that I've been in a lot of organizations, and a lot of times the leadership model is a big lie. It's idealized, oh, we'd love to be this way, but it's not really the way things work. So like, here's the latest one. I work for a company now, the Federal Reserve Bank, where everything is completely set up to never change anything. And at the same time, we're getting all these messages about we need to move forward. We need to promote innovation, independent thinking, fail quickly so that we can make progress. And you're like, that's just not even true. You know what's going to really happen if you fail quickly? You get fired quickly. So at the same time, you need to be very frank because, for example, one of my friends, who is one of the most successful Christian men in a large organization I have ever known, he was being evaluated for leadership promotion. And you know what they told him? We're really not sure about you because you don't match the leadership profile of our organization. Why didn't he match up? You're too altruistic. Like, you care about other people. You want your team to succeed. And two, you're not ambitious enough. You're not ruthless in wanting to get ahead at all costs. And you're like, well, okay, those are great values. So it's better to be frank about your values than to be pretend about your values. So board members need to think about these strategic things. What are my critical needs across the organization? How do we think we're going to build up people? Do we really need to be formal about this? How much do we have to document? You could easily bury your entire organization in a complete set of machinery for doing professional development. Is that what you want? Is that your philosophy? Maybe you should do that sometime. Maybe you have to think about it. Where are we going? Directors need to think about your skills in management for yourself, for the organization, and for your people. And as a staff member, let me emphasize that one of the most important things beyond just thinking about what I need to do my job better is how can I learn to provide useful input into the leadership of the company? And skills like negotiation. If one of the common issues that we've sort of come up with across groups is how do we provide incentives for people who are in the organization? Well, part of getting the right answer for that is for the people who are working to be able to negotiate and say, well, here's what would make a difference to me. A lot of times companies set up incentive programs, which are what the managers think would incent somebody, and it's not real. So it involves working all together to answer these questions. Okay, I think we're happy. We just have to figure out how to break up. And is there any fundamental question like, this is totally bogus and doesn't make sense? Please explain. Any fundamental questions here? Okay, good. I didn't give you too much time. So I'm going to turn the logistics over to Jeff.
Okay,
He's thought about it more than me.
Here's what we're going to do. We're going to break all the board members. We're going to stay in here. All the directors are going to go with Mr. Wilson. I think we're going to try to find some place outside to meet. And all the staff members are going to go with Mr. Doc. This is John Crawford, by the way. If y'all have met John. And so let's break up. And how much time can we have?
Hey, what's the ideal time you think that will be good, and then we can play on that?
I think we can get 15 minutes.
I think 15 or 20 minutes,
15
and
minutes.
then we can continue the discussion over
Yeah.
lunch.
Yeah, then we're going to come back here, then
Unless
we'll
we
break
decide
for lunch,
we want to
and then we'd like for y'all to meet by teams, your country teams at lunch to discuss this, because you'll have 3 different groups coming together. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, done.
Okay. Your country teams, because you'll have 3. Does that make sense?
Yes.
3 different groups coming together.
20 minutes.
Your country team.
Yeah, done.
Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes.
3 different groups coming together.
20 minutes.
Your country team.
Yeah, done.
Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes.
3 different groups coming together. Your country team.
20 minutes. Yeah, done.
Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes.
3 different groups coming together. Your country team.
20 minutes. Yeah, done.
They started with this objective, the same way we are doing in Zoom. And now they went through the 3-year plan.
Okay, so they
So
went through
this
the
is-
3-year plan.
Part for the teams.
Different groups coming
I think, first of all, this is not a new topic, and then we're going to try to take this topic and make it fairly as simple as possible because you all track results now. Is anybody not tracking results? The tracker the tracker that we're sending out are some of the key elements that are currently on the peer servants activity report that I think most of you are submitting on a regular basis to peer. And when you really think about it, every donor is going to require certain numbers to be tracked and to tell whether you're being successful, to tell whether you are making progress. So my story, we're both going to start with a little story, but my story is really with Patrick and KFIC when back in 2013-14, KFIC was not at sustainability at that point. And so Patrick put together a plan that says we're going to get to sustainability. And the way he did that, he developed an action plan that said, I'm going to need to do this. So we worked together on it because I helped him with the numbers. Because based on my background, you can see I'm into numbers. I'm kind of, what Dick was kind of geeky in certain things. Numbers is my geek area. Some people say I can look at a balance sheet and read a story. You know, because a balance sheet tells a story. If you read it from month to month, it tells your income statement. If you read it month to month, tells your story. I can tell things sometimes that's going on at KFIC without having talked to Patrick, just by reading the tracking. But it has a lot of numbers. And you know, when God told Noah to build the ark, how did Noah come up with his action plan for that? He went, number one, what? What's going to happen? What do I got to do? Well, what did God do? He gave specific action plans to Noah. God was a leader in this case. He's like the board for your organization. He's setting the strategy. He gave them specific details, and I don't know if you all know this, but there's a place in Kentucky in the U.S. that has built a replica based on God's numbers, God's exact plan, if you will, put the plan together, and that exists today in Kentucky. It's another example of taking your objective and seeing it through.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're going to make this session as interactive as possible. I know we had a very good lunch, so I'll be watching those who are snoozing or anything. It was funny. I didn't know most. You know what Uber drivers are.
Yeah.
So here in Kenya, for them to get a loan to buy their car, what credit metric does Uber use to measure their credit risk? Does anybody know? And you have control over it. No? What metrics does Uber use to ensure that I'm going to give this driver a loan for that case? Anybody? And you have control over it.
Like the
You
start
are-
of the
you are-
rating.
you are-
Rating.
You,
Yeah, the
yes.
rating.
Oh, the rating.
Ratings.
Oh, yeah.
So if you give an Uber driver
Yeah.
3
Yeah.
rating, he may never get a loan.
Yeah.
So sometimes small things you
Yeah.
assume are very critical to somebody else.
What is important?
Credit ratings like a 5-star. If you give the Uber driver a 4-star, he may not get a loan. Or he may get an
It's not high enough. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when you get into an Uber car, just remember that you have control over. He will never tell you this guy is on loan, but you have control. And Uber tracks the credit, the rating. And same case to mobile loans. How do they track the credit rating of that individual who's taking the phone call? I mean, the individual, the mobile owner. So they track the number of top-ups and how often he's in the call. And they do their algorithms behind and it's determining whether he's eligible for a loan or not. And that's how they track. So tracking is very, very, very important. For you, it's all about the donors. Whether it's peer servants and poverty, they won't look at your static position today. They want to know your journey. Where you've been, how you've come, whether you're going into a dip. Sometimes dips are not bad. But if you can explain yourself how you got into that dip, and then you're going to get yourself out, they may come and give you that extra push. But you have to tell the story. Sometimes when maybe I may ask, maybe one of the loan officers, how are you doing? They always come back with, okay. I'm doing okay. And then when I ask a question, they start telling me about their challenges. I'm like, but you told me it was okay. So I'd rather maybe tell me it was so-so, we've had our challenges and our success, and give me that journey that you've been. That is helpful to me, the donors, and anybody else who you're targeting in terms of help, whether it's capacity building or anything else. So for the loan officers in management, that is really, really critical. Bad numbers are not always something. It's okay to talk about bad numbers, but just give us the track record. that may explain something much more bigger and better than just giving you your spot position today, which may not be good.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, one of the things I've learned with dealing with microfinance is the numbers that are not trending correct, the numbers that are not trending correct can sometimes be more valuable than the ones that are trending correct. Because that tells you, it gives you an early indication of where you need to put your effort, where you need to work. Go to the next slide.
so Evans gave us a good segue to our presentation today when he mentioned the challenges of absence of credit records. If you remember, let's see, homework from yesterday's presentation. What happens in the case of absence of records, what does it lead to? It leads to higher cost because of the lack of records. So they don't know who you are and where you're going. So the risk is high. The perception is the risk is high because you have no records. And you could be actually a stronger credit for a loan or for funding. And the second one was they have inability to assess your viability because they don't have that story. It's just tell me your story, tell me your journey. And that's what tracking is all about. And the other thing he mentioned is even when you're tracking, there's so many things you can track. The operating expenses in Africa are quite high. High staffing expenses, high transaction costs, high cost of managing savings, high monitoring costs. The portfolio at risk, poor level skills or poor reporting systems. The key is all these challenges, how do we get to understand them and just find trends to analyze and provide solutions. So tracking even, we're going to present tracking even from a loan officer perspective, what you should be looking at and how best to monitor to ensure you're going to be sustainable or when to make those hard decisions. So you've done 80% of the work. Yesterday you provided us with, you can either call it the vision, mission, or values. So we know where you're going, the end point, what's your target, your 3-year target. And then you have your short-term targets. So what's my journey towards the end goal? So you gave some of those indicators yesterday. So you're already on the journey towards your goal. So the question is, now what? So,
Yeah, so now what? So I think that turns over, because you can see we're playing back and forth. Now what? Well, basically what we're saying now is, and I'm sorry I wasn't here yesterday, it was late getting here, but I know you talked about it, your objectives, your key objectives to meet your strategy plan over the next 3 years. I also know you talked about action plans yesterday. Each objective, whether it be client growth, OSS, getting more donors to invest in your MFI, no matter what the objective is, it's not going to happen without knowing how are you going to go. And I know Paul has put a lot of emphasis on this in the recent discussions with you, but in order to do key measures, to find out what you're going to track, you better have a good action plan. A plan that has been thought through in great detail as to how are we going to get to 3,000 clients. We're at 1,000 now. How are we going to do this? Back to the example of Patrick and his OSS, he mapped it out. So that's what an action plan really does, it maps it out. So hopefully you have some action plans already developed, and you're going to be refining those and make them better. Because the next thing I think we're going to do is an exercise.
yes. So we're going to do a group exercise. You talk about your groups. And for us, when you're executing, how do you execute and track activity? So all of it came up with objectives. So our thought process was, you need to be focused. So for you to be focused, you can't take 10 elements to track. Just select 3 or 5 critical elements that are going to drive you towards your objective. So, and then in between that, what are the progress indicators? So before I go, and then how often will it be measured, and then you're going to do the credit score test. So for this activity, we're going to use everybody. Yesterday I had everybody wants to grow their clients. So we're going to work with clients. So just take your index card, and we're going to go, each group has to give me 2 or 3 measurable elements that are going to grow your clients. And you have 2 minutes to do that.
And so you'll need a spokesman, so somebody can write it down on the index card. Basically, you're taking one of your objectives, like Richard said, and you're coming up with 2 or 3 of the key measures that you're going to have in place to measure your progress towards your growth with clients in order to meet your objectives. Think about your action plan of growing your clients. What are the key components of that? And we gave you 2 to 3. You can have more than 2 to 3 if you need it, but don't have more than 5 for each objective. Because if you get more than 5, you're going to get swamped. Because you need to do this for each objective. So say yesterday you had 5 objectives. Now, we're just taking one of them, client growth. So think about how you would measure your progress in client growth. The branches maybe.
It's simple.
We have some key indicators that we try to measure, such as the number of women opening account with our MFI. The second will be number of women receiving loan, because we have both deposit maker and loan takers. The third will be the number of women running the income generating activities for self-employment.
Running income
of generating activities.
Okay. What's the measure on that last one? Like just the number of women doing that?
Yeah. We count the number of women, the owner of income generation, self-income generation activities for self-employment.
Okay.
The key element how we shall measure is by increasing the number of loan officers to 14.
Again?
Increasing loan officers. Then still to measure the clients increase, we shall do also introduction of new loan products. Then the other objective was OS